So I think we got cut off in the last one, but going on from the Shijik business, um, there's a confusion over what's supposed to be happening. So is there a region, for instance, and among the American lawyers themselves? So, for instance, there's this. Is there supposed to be a prohibition on what Hayek called, I suppose, just like we call it now, the social justice? So Hayek prescribed that for the reason that justice is supposed to be a matter involving activity. It can't be what Justice Roberts had a case about housing discrimination, but he said it was de facto housing discrimination. So the laws on the book weren't creating the discrimination, but it already exists. People live in certain places which are not desirable to live in. But so there's a confusion about what agency is supposed to be disposing of which difficulties. So if you speak of, and some people are trying to say that um, the legal branch of the government should even be finding remedies for this kind of problem, for the de facto problems. Um, but at the same time, the lawyers are actually, which seems wrong according to the scheme that the lawyers are supposed to say what the law is and follow what the legislature says. But the lawyers themselves are trained to solve certain problems which they have been sort of grandfathered in. So there's a kind of constitutional packet of issues which have to do with social justice, which have come in and everyone has accepted them because they're nonpartisanly accepted in general. So for instance, that the equality of women and the issue of the women's suffrage and so forth, which weren't there at the beginning of the founding of the order, but which were today. The lawyers take it for granted that anything along those lines is desirable, and therefore they come up with all kinds of schemes to bring it about, and even by modulating the current constitution to try to bring about greater representation for women and other such things. It's not clear where the impetus for these movements is supposed to come. So if you think of something like the not too distant past where the gay marriage stuff came in, how does that come about? So it seems like de facto you have in the press, in the media, you have the press and the media sets what the public opinion will be, and then later they sit back and declare we've we are the voice of the public opinion after actually having created it. So therefore, then of course, all the problems that are well known, the money coming in to create these different views comes in. So, for instance, I was struck by how blatant the manipulation is in another issue, in this issue of the Ukraine and Russia, over that people don't usually. It's not part of the culture to smile as much as it is in America, which is there's something very insidious that's connected to, um, let's say, rich North Atlantic West global capitalism, which has to do with the idea that you're supposed to be smiling all the time, and otherwise you're viewed as abnormal and you're viewed as outside the job market and so on. Um, I mean, if you think about capitalism in its most extreme and pure form, which would be slavery in the old in the old South, there was something called a watermelon grin, which is something which basically means, um, whether you're smiling or not is not actually an indication of whether you're happy or not. It's a communication form. So the slaves in the Old West were supposed to smile because they were supposed to communicate that they were happy. So even if they were miserable, and often the condition would be in dire peril of their lives or of taking a beating or a whipping or whatever, they would have to smile and show their teeth. Um, so in the like way, you can see that if everybody's going around smiling, it kind of would make the elites a little bit. It creates a very strange psychological situation. So this kind of thing, where if a legislature is moved by public opinion, and if public opinion can be generated through money, through propaganda, then you have a situation where a question of principles is it's outside the question of principles. It's only within the machinations of the forces just mentioned. So when Zizek is bringing up a question of principles regarding the universality in this all lives matter or Black Lives Matter issue, it's hard. It's difficult at first to ask what is supposed to be happening on principle according to the laws as they stand now, and according to the way the order is founded. One could interpret. So if you took it just from the legalistic standpoint, you could say the Black Lives Matter is something is not a is about a de facto issue. But then you could also say it's an issue about wrongful acts of police officers. If that's so, then one could interpret the All Lives Matter to say all issues of wrongful acts of police officers should be, we should have restoration of right behavior in all such cases, without respect to the state coming in and saying this is a case with that has to do with race or so. That could be one argument for why people, a Tucker Carlson type would say all lives matter. But that doesn't really get us to what the principle is here. It strikes to me that when Zizek brings in this claim that by saying all lives matter, the people that he's opposed to would be tacitly favoring the current form of life, the current elite form of life anyway. He assumes a positive force to non-action. So can one do that in the, I mean, what would Hayek say about that is an interesting subject matter to bring in. So the whole rationalistic technocratic mindset, which says we have a scheme that can solve this problem, and this problem, is shared largely by the right-wing politicos, let's say, whether they're lawyers or actual politicians and so forth, in some areas such as women's rights, but it's just not shared in every area. So there's a big problem that there's this tacit assumption that certain issues of discrimination are, it's our right to discriminate, and other ones they're not. But then there's the question of when should we be actively doing this kind of Rawlsian version of liberalism, and when should we do the Nozick minimal state? When is it better to allow these problems to be addressed by people rather than by legislative acts? I feel like there's something in Zizek's analysis which is, it's not that it's dishonest, but it shows a presupposition towards a certain position. And if you started with another presupposition, it simply wouldn't make sense. It's this whole, again, it's this sense that the just remaining legalistic under the principle that everyone's equal under the law is an action in itself because it's not addressing the problem. He assumes that the problem must be addressed in a certain way according to the view that the minority must be problems with respect to minorities must, whether or not they're de facto problems, must be addressed by the polity as apparently has government programs as changes in the law. Um, so this is the difficulty. I think that we need some more clarification on what the liberal order is supposed to demand here. The one problem with it is it seems to be very technocratic. It seems to be push towards the view that solutions to all problems can be found, and simply must be prosecuted. So we simply must go after them and solve them. This is one of the things Strauss is saying in his introduction, is that maybe the traditional views had a deeper insight into the possibility of human evil, such that some problems that we think we can solve in a technocratic, rational way can't be solved. So there's that issue is in play in this problem between the philosophy and revelation. But within that, we don't necessarily encounter the culture civilization divide, because revelation could go beyond, could outstrip any logos or any language or any objectivity, but still be true simpliciter, whereas the cultures are not true simpliciter. Each one is true in their own way, which um, there's some problems with, which makes me want to analyze Dugin's position more closely, where Dugin is, how so far is Dugin's position an expediency, and how so far can he really subscribe to it? His talk of the bipolarity and the many civilizations, and what does civilization mean in Dugin's view. The other problem I wanted to approach was Zizek's account of nature as blind nature, or that only the human being is doing something purposeful, and the virus, COVID, can't be given a meaning. That's a problem I'm trying to approach in a more analytic way for the moment, try to get closer to the same with this problem of the example of the Black Lives Matter, All Lives Matter split. I want to get closer to that, more analytic with that. So we'll try to do another iteration or another go at that with more clarity. Thinking of Dostoevsky's saying of the half-truth of science is much like this problem with art and technique, which is that it's always a particular move away from reality simpliciter. Okay, so let's leave it there for the moment as far as it goes.